Folks, in this video we are going to learn how to connect an ATX style power supply. We'll do the connections on the motherboard and some of the peripheral items, and I'm going to do it outside of the case, and then at the end of the video I will slap one in a case and show you some different things in there to watch out for. So let's get started. Alright, so here I have two different style motherboards, ATX, micro ATX. We've got a 140 millimeter fan, we've got a mechanical hard drive, and a graphics card. Alright, so for power supplies, I have two examples here. One is EVGA 400 watt, and the other is an PVA 500 watt. And there's a reason why I have two of these. We'll get to that in a second. Let's look at what is pretty much the standard connectors that you're going to see on one of these power supplies. All right, so we have our 20 plus 4 or 24 pin connector. This is going to connect to the motherboard, and I'll show you in a little bit where that goes. You have a Here we have the CPU power connectors. There are two sets of 4, and some situations you'll have other power supplies that may have 1. I'll show you an example of that. And some places you may have sets of 2 of these. If you get a certain X570 motherboards or some of the other motherboards that allow extreme overclocking, you will need 3 sets of 4. Alright, so these are your GPU connectors. In this case we've got a 6 pin and a 6 plus 2 or 8 pin, and depending on how much power your graphics card needs will depend on how many of these you actually need. So not all power supplies come with GPU power connectors, all right? So that's something you've got to keep an eye out for. And sometimes they may only have a 6 pin, so be careful. All right, these are MOLED connectors, and you know, not used as much today for a lot of stuff, but a lot of people use these for their case fans, so we will show that to you. And then here is the SATA power, and I will show you these connected to a hard drive. Alright, so here is the motherboard, and let's just go through these one at a time. Here's where your 24 pin connector is going to connect. I probably won't be able to do this one-handed, but notice on here this little gizmo here. It's going to snap over that. Okay, so I'm going to do that with 2 hands, and we're going to pause, and you got to make sure those snap in there, and boom. And now here is your 2x4 for your CPU connectors, and let's go ahead and grab those. So here they are, all right, and same thing with these. Now, this is a lot harder to do inside the case, just so you know, but we'll go ahead and connect them here. I'm lining them up, and I'm going to press down and snap them in. Alright, so here's an example of a graphics card that takes a 6 plus 8 connector. In the example, we're going to connect only an 8 pin. So here is our RX 5500, and I'm going to need to do the 6 plus 2 on here, and that's going to go in there. Same thing where I've got to watch out for the little gizmo. You'll see this is notched out to allow that to fit in there. So let's go ahead and put this in. Alright, so that is in there. So this thing's dangling around. You would want to tie this off, preferably with a zip tie or something else like this that you can tie down, and just make sure that these ends are not going to end up in a CPU fan or a GPU fan. Alright, so let's talk about our mechanical hard drive. There are two connectors on here that you're going to need to connect, but for power, you're going to use your SATA power right here. So let's go ahead and line that up, and there's only one way this is going to fit on there, okay? Alright, so like I said, this fits on only one way, so be careful when you are putting it on. And that also will snap in place like I have there. You'll have to go back later on and put your SATA 3 connector that comes from your motherboard. Alright, so here is an example of a fan that has lights. You can get one that have single lights or RGB controlled. And there are different connectors on here. This connector here would connect to your motherboard as a system fan. However, if you're going to have a bunch of these, you may not have that many connectors on your motherboard, so you'll daisy chain these together and then connect them to the power supply. So let's do that now. Same deal here. These only go together one way, and so they're going to snap in place. So let's go ahead and do that. And I've got them lined up, and boom, together. All right, so that shows you the basics of one type of motherboard. Let's take a look at a different one. So this is a micro ATX motherboard. It's going to have a lot less features. The main thing to note about this is only 1x4 CPU fan, or excuse me, 1x4 CPU power connector. Now I could have used the other power supply, and I just would have not connected one of the 4-pin connectors, obviously. This cheap Apivia has a single one, which is good and bad, right? If I had a better motherboard, this power supply would not cut it. So same thing, gonna snap that in. In this case, another 24-pin connector, and I won't be able to do this one-handed most likely. We'll try anyways. Yep, actually, boom. So that goes in there. Same thing. We've got MOLEDs. On this one, we've got a mixture of MOLEDs. Sorry, there's a MOLED there, okay, and then the SATA powers. So this is a little different where the other one had all the same connectors on one strand. This has a mixture, which may be good or bad. So you would do the same thing here with the fan, connecting the MOLED and hard drive to the SATAs. All right, so let's look at a case, putting one of these in a case. All right, so I have this case sitting around, and basically what I'm going to do is go ahead and put the power supply in here. And I'm going to leave these cables sitting here for now. Now, one question that would probably come up is whether to put the power supply in before the motherboard or the motherboard before the power supply. Now, in some situations, you will not be able to route your CPU power connector if you don't do it first. And if you remember the CPU power connector, that was the 2x4 connector that we had. Some of the better cases, and I'll show you one here. This Deep Cool Matrix has a nice big gap at the top above the motherboard, and you can easily fit in the power supply after the fact. In this case though, I honestly couldn't tell you if there is enough of a gap to run it afterwards. So that's one thing to check first, all right? Take your motherboard in, line it up, and in this case, there is you're going to have to run your power supply CPU connectors underneath the motherboard, all right? And one of the things in here that helps you out with that are these standoffs in here, okay? There's a bunch of those, and they basically create a gap between the motherboard and the frame. In this case, we probably will run our CPU connectors through this spot on the motherboard. We'll just see how that goes. So I'm gonna go ahead, in this case, put the power supply in first. Talk about fastening our power supply to the case. we have these 4 screws that are going to come with your power supply, and I couldn't tell you the exact size in case you bought your power supply used, but you also usually get some of these with your case as well. So, all right, so the bottom of your case should have vents in it. All right. Sometimes, pre-made gaming computers like HP and Dell, they actually won't have that. They'll have their fan pointing towards the motherboard, such as the Dell Inspiron 3670. In this case, though, you will want your fan is going to point in the direction of the vent here. All right. So once you get that all lined up, then you can start fastening in these screws. All right. So a lot of times, it doesn't pay to tighten these down all the way right off the bat, trying to line up the other ones. So you want to get a few threads on it, and then get all 4 screws in and then tighten it down. All right, so notice the pattern I used here. This one, that one, and that one. All right, so let's go ahead and route our CPU connectors. These guys. And, some cases are easier to do this with, and some are a pain in the ass. But I'm going to basically lift this thing up, and then we're going to run this around the other side. And I may just put a temporary tie on it, where later I would put a zip tie. If I can find the right connectors. Okay, so here are our CPU connectors, and we're going to run them basically through the what would be the right-hand side, through that area that would have the access, and up around to the top, hopefully through that hole up there. Okay, so I have the cable going there, pulling out the all the slack out of it, and then here we are on the other side. Obviously I have both panels off of this. This is installing the PSU, so you definitely will have to remove both panels from your case. And then this guy is going to fit up through here, okay? And I'm going to come back, and some cases have it better than others. You'll look for something like this to secure your cable, and that way it stays in place. In this case, not the best design overall for that, but we'll make something work. All right, so normally I would use a zip tie. I'm going to be removing this after we get done with this video, but we would secure that, and hopefully we'd find another place to secure this too. This case does not have that, so we would probably use another area to do that. Now, one thing also to note, depending on your type of CPU cooler, make sure that you put your CPU cooler on ahead of time. If you do not have this large of an opening and you need to put the bracket on before you put the motherboard in, but that's something outside of the scope of this video, really. All right, so I've placed the motherboard in here. Normally you would put your input to output shield in first, all right? But like I said, we're not going to keep this in permanently. So next thing I would do is, make sure all your now the standoffs have to line up with the access holes on your motherboard, and this is a good place to see if you have all of your standoffs in. In this case, we're looking pretty good. So we've got those lined up, right? You can just see it here. Here's your standoff. So I would then come back and tighten these down. Now, something I like to do before I do that, is verify which screw that was in my baggie that came with my case, which one of those actually screws into that. Because sometimes these cases You know, for the most part, it's standard, but it does seem like you go from one case to another. One type of screw may not work with another one. So something to keep in mind. All right, just so you can see it, in this case, this is the actual hardware that worked. We've got one in so far. And normally you would put anywhere from, say, 6 to 8 or more of these in ahead of time to save time on the video. I just put the one in. All right, so here is here's the actual screw that is in there. We'll put one more in just for the heck of it. And this is a place where a magnetic screwdriver, such as this one, is a good thing. Usually I actually put the screw on before I put it in, and then we'll fasten it in. And here is the screw on the end of the screwdriver, and hopefully we have these lined up. You don't want to cross thread your screw into your standoff. Now, somewhere in here, folks, I have an example of a standoff, so you can see the whole thing. So, whoops, we just lost it. Okay, so here's the standoff, threaded on this side so that it will screw into the case itself, and then on the other side is where it is threaded so that you can fasten the little screws through the motherboard and into this. All right, so now that we've got this nice and secure, you know, just like I showed you on the motherboard, you got to make sure that this guy lines up correctly, and usually, you know, it helps to do both of these at the same time. So we'll want to get that in place, and hopefully we can get these to snap in, and voila. So they are in. And then what should we do next, folks? Let's go ahead and put the 24 pin connector in. All right, so here's our motherboard 24 pin connector. And then on the power supply, it is this big ginormous thing. So once again, we want to go through the side of the case, through where the right hand access area is, and then we're going to bring it up through this spot. All right, so let's push. Now we want to basically, we don't want to see a lot of cables inside of our case, right? Now this case only has a acrylic cover. Only has an acrylic cover. If this was tempered glass, you would really be a lot more concerned about how much cable folks can see. So you're going to have to work these cables around, and this is where, you know, you want to basically work with these ties, right? So I'm going to bring this through here. I believe that's the right hole, and I'll check by coming in over here. So I could either come in from above or from here. I think we'll do this one. All right, and I'm going to rotate this around. So I'm going to rotate the case back to sitting on its side, and then we are going to snap these connectors in and line them up. So we should hear a snap. All right, so hopefully you saw that. Sometimes the lighting here is obviously not the best, but there is your 24 pin connector attached to the motherboard. On the back side, I would find somewhere to tie this down, keep it nice and tight. That way when we put the case cover back on, that it will not restrict things. So this would be a good spot to put a zip tie on it. All right, since this is only temporary, we're using these twist ties. So that puts that in place. For the hard drive, same thing. I'm going to route the cables through here to make this look as less ugly as possible. We need the SATA power connector, so we're going to try and get through the same hole over here. If not, we may have to use the other hole next to it, but it looks like it's going to fit. All right, so I routed the SATA power through there, and so I'm going to go ahead and connect it to the hard drive. All right, so it's connected to the hard drive. We would do the same thing with this cable, find a place to tie it off so it's not just dangling here and looking ugly like it currently does. All right, so let's say we had a case fan in here, and this is just for demonstration purposes, and we wanted to connect it to the power supply. We would run its MOLED through just like we did with the other ones and connect it on the other side. All right, so we would take the fan's MOLED and connect it to our power supply's MOLED, and boom, that part's done. All right, last thing for us to do is to route our graphics card GPU connectors, GPU power connectors. So we're going to go through that same hole, if it'll fit, and come up somewhere in the vicinity of where the PCI Express card is. So either that slot or that opening there. All right, we run our power supply through there, and we're going to go through that hole like I said. All right, so we need to put our graphics card in, and it's got to line up with the PCI slots right there, and then it should snap in. So before we connect the power, we want to secure our GPU to the case. All right, so depending on how well your case is manufactured, a lot of times you will pick a hole in the middle of that connector or that bracket, excuse me, that mounting bracket. In this case though, I'm having to pick one on the side because it's just not going to line up. And then we'll make sure this is all nice tightened down before we connect our power supply. All right, so we have the power supply in there, and we're going to go ahead and hook up the if we had a single 8-pin, which we don't, these are usually 6 plus 2, we will go ahead and connect this, the 6 and the 2, to make the 8-pin there. All right, so if you work these together, they will basically, the 6 and the 2 will come together as one, and then we will put that in there. And here the snap, it's in there nice and tight. So on the other side of the case, we would once again secure those cables, and once you do the rest of this stuff then that you need to do, then you're going to go ahead and put that access panel back on. This is just the power supply connections though. There's a lot of other stuff that one has to finish before this is a working computer, but you are somewhat of the way there. So thanks for checking out the video. Please like, please subscribe. Thank you. And keep an eye out for the rest of the series 2020, How to Build a Computer. Thank you.